This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We come to you regularly with short business episodes, short private equity episodes, interviews with brilliant business leaders, brilliant private equity leaders, as well as body of life episodes about different pieces of life or business advice and more. Today, we're joined by one of the most brilliant people we get to visit with regularly. We're joined by Rick Kes. Rick is with RSM. RSM's the leading sort of middle market private equity firm, consulting firm in the country. We talk regularly with Rick about trends in private equity. We're sitting on some really interesting facts right now. First, one of the things that the private equity industry has been waiting for a long time is rate cuts. Those seem to be coming probably sooner rather than later. Second, the stock market's taking on the chin back in correction territory. Is there more and more concerns about a coming potential recession? And then, Rick, when we look at these things, rate cuts, which the industry has wanted, potential recession, which nobody really wants, give us a sense of what does this mean for private equity deal activity? What do you expect going forward over the next period of time? What's your prognosis?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where you're weighing all these factors together that you were sort of anticipating some of these things coming at some point. Obviously, interest rates, I think we've all been kind of hoping and waiting to see those get cut. I think with the jobs activity from last week coming in softer than expected and other economic kind of headwinds, we're anticipating that September is pretty likely that we'll see a rate cut. And if that happens, I think the direction will help, private equity firms decide, maybe now is the time to start moving on the dry powder that they have. I think that piece alone, the dry powder available for deal activity, is probably the piece that we think is going to help fuel a lot of that activity, alongside of obviously rate reductions. In terms of the recession and economic slowdowns and things of that nature, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think a year ago, a lot of people were talking about recession and we never really felt or saw it. Will we see it now? It's uncertain. I think the U.S. economy is very resilient, as it's proven out over the last 12 months or so. And so it would be interesting to see what the economic activity works in that part of the equation. But I think on the part of the equation of interest rates going down, dry powder available, I think we're hopeful that we'll see that really spur the activity in the M&A market that we're hoping for.
Thank you. And you see, like when the stock fell 2-3% Friday, it's going to fall 2-3% today. What does that lead to? If you're a financial advisor, a wealth manager, it leads to lots of people calling to say, oh my God, what's going on? What do we do? From the private equity leader perspective, what is their perspective? Is the perspective more, this may lead to interest rate cuts or may further foster interest rate cuts, and they start to get a little excited that deal activity will go forward? Because, as you said, there's two things. There's a ton of exits that need to happen. And KKR recently said they expect more exits this quarter than they've had in a long time. There's also a lot of need to deploy capital, dry powder, as you said. Like Blackstone says, look, we just had our biggest quarter deploying capital in a couple of years. And there's a lot of private equity funds. If they're not deploying capital, their LPs at some point get restless, just like at some point if they're not returning capital, their LPs get restless. So there must be a lot of pent-up appetite here to do something.
Exactly. I think that pent-up appetite, has got to be kind of causing a lot of people to like us to be excited for what could happen if, the M&A train kind of gets back on the tracks that we would hope it to be. And, I think, you've got, to your point, interest rates going down, private equity folks excited about that. I think also the volatility in the market kind of helps them with their story as they go out and find LPs. I know, a couple episodes ago, you and I were talking about LPs, pulling back some of their allocation into private equity because, I think because of, how the public markets had been performing, and this maybe is a good reminder to people that private equity firms could use in that fundraising environment to say, you know, there is volatility in the public market, and there is a little less safety there than maybe you thought 6 months ago or 3 months ago or what have you. So, I do think there's, bits and pieces of all the news that comes in, across our desk every day that we look at and say, that's a plus, that's a minus, in terms of what it means for deal activity and the overall private equity kind of ecosystem as it stands. So, I think all in all, I feel like I've seen more things leading me to feel positively about the direction. But again, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic in life. So it could just be my current, sitting in my chair, kind of leaning towards the optimistic side versus the pessimistic side.
No, I think it's a great perspective. One of the best quotes I've heard recently on that is save like a pessimist, invest like an optimist, meaning make sure you're safe, but then invest, for bigger returns as long as you got enough money put away for safety and defense too. And I love that concept. Rick, anything else you wanted to share today as you start to look at the markets and what you see happening in the private equity world?
No, I don't think anything in particular. Obviously, we're coming down to just a few more months until the election, so that will also cause people to sit back and think as well, and try to figure out what that might mean, if anything, to the deal flow environment. I hope it's the latter. I hope it's not going to cause people to slow down or really pause anything and just continue moving forward, assuming that they'll just make it do in the new reality, whoever wins, in November. And then, I think that will be, hopefully one of the last things that hold people back. If interest rates go down, the election, is over. I think hopefully then, we'll be able to say, okay, now we can really kind of get this, ball rolling, so to speak.
Let me ask you two questions about that, and you don't have to answer, of course, if you wouldn't like to. One of the candidates talked about as vice president has been Tim Walz, the Minnesotan, and you're a Minnesotan. I mean, from the outside perspective, seems like one of the most boring men in America. But you could tell us from an insider's perspective whether a fine, capable governor and so forth, or you don't have to comment if you don't want to.
Yeah, no, I think I've always from Jesse Ventura to Tim Pawlenty to Tim Walz, I think we've had great governors in our state, and I think Tim Walz is a former educator. He was also in the military, so I think he's got a lot of things that people like about him. He's also has a lot of things that in Minnesota that people aren't so happy about. So it's just like any politician. I think there's people on both sides of the coin for Tim. And I think obviously in Minnesota we get a lot of press about his activity with that current position being open, and him being a candidate for it. And it'll be interesting to see. But I think at the end of the day, it's a little interesting because of just what Minnesota is in terms of how it typically votes, and whether or not that's a state that really brings enough of the value to the presidential ticket as other states might, just from a pure kind of electoral college voting perspective. So I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, and like I said, Tim and all the other governors in Minnesota have been fantastic, and I love living in Minnesota, and it's obviously where I was born and raised, and where I live today. So hopefully we'll see what happens, and my guess is in the next couple of hours, maybe tomorrow, we'll see if Tim wins or Tim gets the position or someone else. So.
No, it's so interesting because you got the Pawlenty guy, the Tim Walz guy, and then you did have Jesse the Body Ventura, and that was a little exciting, right? And he didn't even do a bad job.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. That was before the time where I could actually vote, so I can't take credit or misfortune on him winning that election. But it was definitely interesting, and definitely gets a fair amount of play still on the local radio about remember the day that Jesse Ventura won. So it's just it's an interesting position for sure.
No, and then we also had Franken, of course, is a Minnesotan too, and interesting, and Bob Dylan, who didn't run for office. So lots of famous Minnesotans. I guess the next question is, and you don't have to answer this either. There are a number of celebrities that say they will move out of the country if Trump wins, and I don't know who for. I don't, but I certainly won't leave the country whether Kamala wins or President or Donald Trump wins. Vice President Kamala Harris or President Trump wins. When people say to you they'll leave the country if this person wins or that person wins, you don't have an opinion on that as a professional, correct? You don't want to talk about that, do you?
No, not really. Yeah, no. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I guess maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the world today is with the way that technology works and the economy being a fairly global economy, I don't know that leaving the country, accomplishes all the goals that you may think it does. You're still pretty well tied in, from a global economic perspective to everything that goes on, whether it's in the US or in Europe or Asia or anywhere else. Like we're all pretty dependent on each other, I think. So it'll be interesting to see, if people actually fall through in some of those comments that they've made.
But your point is really well taken. We are a very codependent world. So when people say things like that, you sort of take it with a grain of salt because we are a very, very interdependent world. Rick, as always, great to visit with you. Thank you very much for talking to us on the Becker Private Equity Business Podcast. To our audience, anybody there has a suggestion for a guest, please feel free, 773-766-5322. And thank you for listening. Chanel, thank you.